Hello, everyone. Hope everyone's doing all right tonight. We are going to be talking about management tonight. That was this week's blog topic. So hopefully you saw that, but we're going to dive into it a little more deeply tonight. I do want to remind you to pop any questions that you have into the chat, and I will be sure to get to them a little bit later after I go through a couple things. We do have a couple questions that were submitted ahead of time. Last live, I ran for 30 minutes, and we had a bunch of questions sent in early, so that kind of filled up all of our time. So I do have this running for a little bit longer, just in case there's some more live questions, to make sure that everybody gets those in. But be sure to pop those into the chat at any point while I'm sort of yammering away here. So let's get started with what I mean by management. So management is anything that we can implement right away that requires little or no training, and that will help prevent the problem from continuing to happen. So it prevents your dog from making that mistake or bad behavior that we don't want our dog to do, prevents him from practicing that over and over and over. And the benefit to that is, if we prevent it from happening, we're giving you, the client, and the dog immediate relief from the problem, preventing him from rehearsing it, so he's not going to get better at it. And that's really important. You know, we've always all heard practice makes perfect. So if we can interrupt that dog from practicing that behavior, he's not going to continue to get better and better at it. So when I look at a case that comes to me for training, I sort of think of baskets and resources, and how can we tackle this case? And management is definitely one of those baskets. So I look at it usually from an exercise and enrichment standpoint. I look at it from training perspective, and then management. And management is always my go-to. It's the first thing I try to recommend to a client, because that's going to give the dog and the client immediate relief. And then we can focus on training, or see if the dog needs more exercise or enrichment. If part of the problem is that the dog is doing an unwanted behavior because maybe they don't have a healthy legal outlet for that behavior in other ways, and it's popping out in an undesirable way. So we kind of tackle it from all those angles. But management immediately prevents the problem from happening. So everybody gets sort of a sigh of relief, and then we can focus energy into training. We can focus energy into those other baskets that I talked about. The other important thing about management is sometimes people don't have the energy, whether that's financial or mental bandwidth, for training. And sometimes management can be a solution all by itself. So sometimes, you know, I love training. I'm a trainer, obviously, so it's something I love doing, but not everyone does love it, and not everyone wants to spend every waking moment or every spare time training their dog. So sometimes management can be a simple solution. So we are going to talk about some trouble areas where management might be really helpful. And I have a slide to pull up here that's going to show us some of these examples. Not that one. Try again. There we go. Okay, so management inside, we might be dealing with barking. So I have a lot of clients who live in apartments, and barking at hallway noises or delivery people is a really big problem for a lot of dogs. So barking from inside an apartment to hallway noise. Lunging or jumping on guests can be a problem, or jumping on furniture or counters. Counter surfing is a big popular problem. Or resource guarding, food guarding, object guarding, toy guarding, bully sticks, that sort of thing. Those are things that potentially we could manage inside and not channel a whole bunch of training energy into. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. Nope, we want to stay on that slide. Thank you. Outside, we might have barking and lunging at people or dogs or even cars, jumping on people, scavenging, noises, hearing noises, particularly in the city, or pulling on leash. So what are some options for management in those areas? So inside, for things like noises and barking, barking at these noises, sometimes simply adding something like a white noise machine can help blur the noises enough that the dog doesn't really hear them and the barking goes down. Sometimes moving the dog to the back side of the apartment, away from the front door, or the back side of a bedroom or another part of the house, if you're in a house, away from that front door, can also help reduce some of that barking. Simple things like closing your blinds and curtain. If your dog is looking out the window, barking at every dog or person that's walking by, closing those blinds or curtains or putting up window film can be a really simple way to obscure your dog's vision so that he doesn't see those things, so he doesn't get set off and the barking goes down. I really love window film because it is removable. It still allows light to come in, but it blurs your dog from being able to see what is outside. So a lot of the sort of Brooklyn brownstones that have those beautiful big windows that go pretty low, if you have sort of a 30 or 40 pound dog or larger, they can stand there and just look right out the window. They don't have to be on furniture or anything, and they can just see everything that goes by. So window film is a really great solution for that. There's lots of patterns. It can look really nice, and it's removable. It's not a permanent thing. For things like jumping, we obviously do eventually want to do training to help the dog not to jump and learn proper greetings, but we can prevent the dog from jumping by simply setting up an X-pen or a baby gate and preventing the dog from greeting, especially if the dog is jumping because they want to greet the person and they're just being social. We don't want that behavior to continue to be rehearsed, because if they're jumping up on someone's like, oh, it's okay, he can jump on me, then that jumping behavior is being reinforced, and that dog is getting the social greeting that they're looking for, and that jumping is actually going to increase. So if we can prevent jumping from happening in the first place, then we're going to see a reduction in that. Counter surfing, same sort of thing, keeping your counters clear, preventing the dog from having access to the kitchen. So you don't want to leave your bagels or croissants sitting on your counter, because every time the dog jumps up on the counter and snags food and is successful, that's going to encourage him to keep checking those counters to see if there's snacks there the next time. So we need to keep those counters clear or put up a baby gate and prevent access so the dog can't get into the kitchen. We could also use crates in those situations. We can close doors. We can do all sorts of really basic things that don't cost a lot of money and don't require any training. For things like resource guarding, if you have a dog who's a food guarder or a resource guarder, using an X-pen area, giving them their meal or their chew or whatever it is that they can be a little guardy with in that confined space, let them work on it. When they're done, they come out, so that you're not accidentally invading their space, making them feel like they have to resource guard. And that gives the dog still access to those chews and things that we want him to have, but doesn't give him an opportunity to continue practicing that guarding behavior, keeps everyone safe, and it gives us an opportunity to work on guarding, in a structured training environment. Outside, if we have bananas, Lori, keep those bananas off the countertops. Outside, if we have dogs who are barking or lunging people or dogs, we may want to look at walking at off-peak hours. We may want to shift our walking schedule so that we're not walking when there's lots of people and dogs out. We may want to consider transporting the dog to another area that's quieter. This is also applicable if the dog is afraid of noises or is afraid of garbage trucks or things like that are maybe barreling down main roads. If we can transport the dog either in a car or a stroller or some sort of carry bag to a park or a green space, sometimes that can give the dog immediate relief from having that fear of noises, or removing an opportunity to be barking and lunging at lots of people and dogs. For scavenging, We can also transport to an area where, you don't want to walk down a commercial street where there's lots of restaurants and there might be lots of garbage debris and restaurant debris out on the street with garbage bags that maybe animals have gotten into, and there's all sorts of yummy snacks on the sidewalk. So you do want to think about where you're walking your dog. Remember, we control our dog's environment. So if we can decide to walk in a different place and not on that street that has lots of fast food restaurants, maybe there's a better option, a more residential street that's not going to have as much garbage or food debris out in the open, or possibly channeling a little bit of training energy initially into muzzle training if it's really a dangerous situation. So if the dog is maybe got a medical issue and they really can't have any food that they might scavenge, then that becomes a more serious concerning issue. So that's something where management can only go so far, and we might need to really focus on something like a muzzle. But I would try to use management in that situation to not walk the dog in those areas where that dangerous stuff might be. If the dog is pulling on leash, certainly looking at something like a no pull harness or a head halter. The head halter is going to take a little bit of training to condition the dog to be comfortable wearing it, but no pull harnesses, you can usually just put them on, and most dogs accept them pretty readily. And that can give you pretty immediate relief from some of the pulling without any significant training involved. For really fearful dogs that are really struggling outside, sometimes we suspend walks and we figure out a way to get those walks back on board, but sometimes we do need to manage that situation by suspending walks. We're staying there. Thank you. For other outside things, for things like barking and lunging at people, sometimes we will also use a turn and go, which is basically a U-turn maneuver. And here's a little graphic of that. So you're out with a reactive dog, whether it's reactive to people or dogs. You're walking. This little hipster cartoon guy here is walking. He sees a lovely woman walking with a whole bunch of dogs. Oopsie, there's a trigger. So we're going to say, okay, let's go this way. And we're going to happy talk. We're going to try to feed our dog to get him to turn around and follow us. We are not going to leash jerk. We're not going to yell at the dog for reacting at the other dogs. We're just going to try to create distance and manage that situation. So we're going to avoid that trigger because we know that the dog is going to go off if we continue to get closer and closer to that situation that he can't handle. The other really helpful thing that we can do in a situation like this is use something called a treat magnet, which is basically a wide mouth food toy or a squeeze tube full of food. So I have a Topple toy here, which is made by Westpaw. It's a nice wide mouth toy. They sell it in two sizes, a large and a small. They actually nestle together. But you can fill this up with wet dog food or liverwurst or anything soft and squishy, really. Put it in there and freeze it. And then it becomes a nice thing that you can use to lure your dog, and you don't have to be constantly fishing out lots of little treats. So you can use that, or you can use a squeeze tube, like a camping squeeze tube. But I've got a little video that I'm going to show you to show how that works and show you what that looks like. So we're going to play that for you. Can we go full screen on that? So here, can you start that over? Okay, so that's the squeeze tube there. And Barbara's just following that, squeezing a little bit of food out, and the dog is following it and licking little bits of food off the end of the squeeze tube there. And you can see you can easily change direction. The dog will just stay with you there. So that's the squeeze tube. And then you can do the same thing and accomplish the same sort of idea with a wide mouth food toy, which is the Topple that I just showed you. And here's that. And you can see he's just totally following that, and it's easy to change directions. And and helps as a really good distraction. You can walk by triggers, you can move through spaces. It's just a really, really great way to manage your dog in difficult situations. Also really great, squeeze tubes are great for the winter when you don't want to have to be fishing out little pieces of food because your maybe hands are covered with gloves because it's really cold out, and you can have a squeeze tube and still be able to reward your dog, whether it's a treat magnet or not. Food tubes are a really great way to use food rewards in the wintertime without freezing your fingers off. Okay, so that's the video there. I do want to mention that on Tuesday, I released another free resource called the Dog Trainers Toolkit, and that has some of my favorite gear options for management. And you can download that on the website for free. You just need to input your email and it will download for you. It's got 6 of my top gear choices for management and links for where you can purchase those things. So if you're interested in that, you can hop over to the website. I think the link is going to be in the chat box for you, so that you can grab that. Okay. Questions. We're about 20 minutes in. We've got some preloaded questions if nobody has questions, but if you do, plop them in the chat box, please, and we will definitely get to them. If not, we will go to some of the ones that were submitted ahead of time. Okay, so Alex sent this in by email. We live in an apartment building and our dog Tim barks whenever anyone is in the hallway. When we're home, we can quiet him, but we have gotten multiple complaints from our neighbors about his barking when we're out, and it's starting to take a toll. So yeah, so this is really hard for people who live in apartments. It sounds like the barking is happening when you're home and when you're not home. So the first thing I always ask about clients when the dog is barking is it only happening when you're not home? Because that's obviously an indicator for potential separation anxiety. So that's something that we want to make sure is not happening. If the barking is only happening when you're not at home, that's something that we want to get a good assessment on and make sure that the dog is not anxious and barking because you're not home. But if the barking is also happening when you're home and you're pretty sure it's just those hallway noises, again, going back to those things like the white noise machines, even things like fans or turning the TV up or having some streaming devices. I know a couple of the streaming devices time out if you're not engaging with them frequently enough, they'll time out so that it's not just burning internet bandwidth. So TV, good old fashioned radio, turned up a little loud to help block out those noises. Creating a barrier across the front door so that the dog can't rush up to the front door every time he hears a noise, or trying to move him into the back of the apartment. So even if you're in a studio apartment, if you can sort of segment the apartment, use an X-Pen or something like that to separate the apartment a little bit, maybe cover the X-Pen with some blankets, make a really sort of cozy Zen den for the dog towards the back half of the apartment with that white noise or radio or TV or whatever is going to go on, that might really help. We want to be sure to avoid using anything aversive, so citronella colors, shock colors, those sorts of things. We definitely don't want to get those into the mix. They can cause way more problems than they solve. So that's a whole nother topic for a different Facebook Live. But it's easy to jump to things like that as thinking that they're going to give you immediate relief and be quick fixes, but they're not the solution for long-term behavior change. So I would be curious what you're doing while you're home to quiet him, to make sure that you're not accidentally sort of rewarding that barking behavior while you're home. So that's something that we would want to look at too, but implementing some of those white noise machines and separating the dog, as far back from the source of the noise, whether it's windows or doors, is going to be your solution there. Other questions? TAFE. Are there instances where managing an unwanted behavior can turn unintentionally into enabling, in particular when you're dealing with triggers outdoors where you have less control? I guess it's possible. It sort of depends on the motivation behind the behavior initially. So if the dog is upset versus non-upset. So if the dog is upset, we aren't going to be able to reinforce a bad behavior in that situation. If a dog is not upset, so if they're frustrated and they're barking at another dog because they're frustrated and they want to go greet that dog, it's possible that you could reinforce barking in that situation, but we really want to give the dog immediate relief in all of those situations. So that wouldn't be my top worry. That sort of stuff can get worked out in the end. The immediate concern is stopping the rehearsal of that behavior over and over. Because if the dog is rehearsing that behavior over and over, even once we sort of start to tackle the problem, if it becomes so well rehearsed, it becomes very ingrained in their heads, and it can be sort of this trigger, like, oh, there's a dog. I bark at dogs when I see them, even if the dog is no longer upset or no longer frustrated, because it's been so well rehearsed. So we want to interrupt that behavior from happening so it doesn't get to that point. If we've sort of accidentally rewarded a bad behavior and the dog's not upset, we can work that out in the end. But the focus needs to be interrupting that behavior so the dog's not continuing to practice it over and over. But controlling those triggers outside, so hard, especially in New York City. You think you're in the clear, and then someone comes around the corner or comes out of a building and you weren't expecting them. That's where your turn and goes can be really helpful, to be able to sort of dodge. Sometimes I tell clients to pretend that they're like a character in a video game, and they're dodging and weaving and going in between cars and crossing the street and doing all sorts of fun maneuvers to dodge and avoid, so that their dog doesn't go off at other dogs. And if they make it all the way back to their apartment or their house and the dog hasn't gone off, you won that level for the day, for the walk. So think of it that way. It becomes a fun little challenge. Other questions? Thanks for that, Tafe. That was a good one. Questions? Adam Savannah via email. We have a new puppy, and naturally we've been having a lot of potty accidents. Yes, potty training. Water is taken away after meals to help prevent accidents, but what else should we be doing? Yes, so this should have been on my list of indoor things to manage. Potty training is essentially management. It's mostly management. So when we have new puppies, we need to manage them and prevent them from having accidents inside. And so we manage that. We do crates or confinement spaces, which sometimes takes a little bit of training, but we don't want to give puppies free access to apartments or homes when they're not housebroken. Because if we do that, they're just going to be peeing and pottying everywhere. And they don't learn that bladder and bowel control. They don't learn the difference between inside and outside. And they're just constantly making mistakes over and over. The concern I would have here also is water being taken away after meals to prevent accidents. So we never want to restrict access to fresh water, for a couple of reasons. One, it's just not how you house train a dog. We want to teach the dog that bladder and bowel control. It's a little bit of muscle memory. So part of why we use crates or confinement spaces is to teach the dog's body to hold it. To get that muscle memory so the body learns to hold it for extended periods of time. One of the big mistakes that people make when they're trying to potty train a puppy is they take the dog out too frequently, and then the dog's body isn't learning to hold it for longer periods of time. So we want to use management in that case to teach the dog to hold it. If we're reducing water, you know, less in, less out, there's certain logic to that, but there's also a risk that, increased water consumption could indicate a medical problem, or it could indicate, something else going on. And if we are withholding water as a means to try to house train a dog, we're not really teaching the dog to hold it. We're just restricting their input. And then eventually, if they have normal input, they still haven't learned to hold it. So that's not really a long-term solution. So that's a concern there. But really my bigger concern would be restricting access to water. You're not going to have a good read on if the dog is drinking too much or not really drinking, because she's only getting it at certain intervals. So we definitely don't want to restrict water as a means to try to house train a dog. But we do want to use management to prevent accidents. So confinement spaces, crates, and then as soon as the dog comes out of confinement, they immediately go outside, and then they're heavily reinforced with food and praise outside for pottying. If you take them outside and they don't go to the bathroom, then they go back into the confinement space. They don't get free access until they've done both functions and they're totally empty. So puppies spend a lot of time initially in the crate for the first couple of weeks or in the confinement space so that they learn to hold it and so that they're prevented from making mistakes inside. Every mistake inside chips away at any sort of progress that you've made outside. So we really want to tighten that management up and make sure that that we're not allowing the dog to have any accidents. Hopefully that helps that. Any other questions? I know I lengthened this one till 8:45, but if we don't have any questions, we can end at 8:30 like the last one. Questions in the chat? No? Okay, for any late joiners, I will just plug my Dog Trainers Toolkit again in case you missed it before. You can download that on the website. It's a free download with my top 6 gear choices. And you can download that there. The link is in the chat box. Do we have another question? We do. Look at that. Lori, any ideas on how to manage getting Bo to be willing to go outside on his own 2 feet? I've been physically taking him outside, so I've enabled this behavior. It's a problem now because I can't lift. Oh, yes. I've moved his food so he's eating his meals near the door in hopes that being near the door will make it easier for him to go out. Okay. Yeah, that's a tough situation because I know the history there a little bit. So Lori has a fearful dog, and she has a backyard, and he's okay going into the backyard, but he needs to usually be carried outside, and she can't do that right now. I would try a long line, and I know that normally he just kind of stays by the door, but I would try a long line because that will give him a little bit of distance. Although you're fully fenced in, he doesn't need a long line because it's fully fenced in. I know it's winter, but really leaving that door open. If he will follow a food path, like a food lure, find it on the ground. You could try a treat magnet in that situation if you can go outside with him. I know your other dog is going to follow that, but that also might encourage him to follow. I would try that treat magnet. If you've got one of these or something similar that you could fill up with something, definitely working to have that, what you're doing there where you're moving his food closer to the door to try to encourage that. But I would initially try a treat magnet or something like that to lure him out. I would also try doing that before meal times, even though he probably goes out after meal times, but trying to work on this behavior when he's a little more hungry and motivated. You're going to have a little bit more success when he's hungry to follow that food lure versus he's had a full meal, he's full of food, and food maybe isn't as motivating at that point because he's already got a full tummy. So you're on the right track there with the high value food. And certainly I know the dynamic between the two dogs. So if Chloe thinks that she's going to get something and Bo thinks he's missing out, that might be enough of a motivator there to help get him outside. So hopefully that helps a little bit. Jamie. Hi, Jamie. My dog is very gentle. The outside. Oops. Where'd that question go? Where'd Jamie's question go? Thank you. It's very gentle, but outside she likes eating things off the street or grabbing a slipper inside. When I try to take it out of her mouth, she low growls and snaps. 1 minute later, she's sweet and cuddly. So that is resource guarding, Jamie. So the management solution for that is keeping those slippers out of reach, and anything that she can't, that she might guard, we want to prevent her from being able to pick those things up. If you are going to try to take something away from her, you want to do a swap. You don't want to just take it and then she's a loser in that situation. So management, sort of get out of Dodge, would be to do a handful of really high value food and toss it away from her. Usually the dog will drop what they have to go retrieve, the pile of hot dogs or whatever it is that you just threw in the other direction. Outside, we talked about this a little bit earlier. Avoiding areas where there's lots of food debris or things like that. If it's really problematic, then to the point where it's maybe medically or physically dangerous, then maybe something like a muzzle training might be warranted. But that's a situation for leave it training. If we're getting out of the management realm and into training, that's something where leave it would be helpful. And then obviously working on resource guarding so that you can safely remove things from her. Resource guarding is a very normal dog behavior. Some dogs do it, some dogs don't, but it's perfectly normal. This is valuable to me. I don't want to give it up. I don't want to lose this valuable thing that I have. And if you're trying to take it from her, she's going to protect it. She's going to try to keep possession of it. I tell people it's kind of like if someone wants to steal your wallet or your purse, you want to protect it. You don't want to, give it up. So leave it and drop it. Definitely. Yep. Those can be used in those situations from a training perspective, but really if your focus is wanting to be able to safely remove things from her, then that's a resource guarding training protocol that she would need to be worked through, so that it's safe to remove things from her and take things from her. If there's been a history of sort of forcibly removing things from her and she just kind of lost in that situation. So she picked up a slipper, you go and you take the slipper, and then she loses the slipper and she didn't get chicken or she didn't get something in exchange, then that usually increases the resource guarding because the dog wants to retain possession of that valuable thing. If you come and take it, now the dog is a big loser in that situation. So when we work through resource guarding, we focus on teaching the dog to like people approaching when they have something valuable. And then we work through a protocol where we, create positive associations with that. So it's a really structured incremental training plan to work through that and to keep everybody safe. And we work through all of that. But sometimes in some resource guarding situations, leave it and drop it are good training options, but most dogs need to work through an actual resource guarding protocol. I did have a dog that I worked with a few months ago that guarded socks and things like that, things that he picked up around the house. And we were able to do a drop it and leave it in most of those cases. So it really kind of depends on the dog, but usually I like to work through a full resource guarding protocol with those dogs because you never know what they're going to pick up and you want to be able to safely take stuff away. So thank you for that question. That was a good one. Hi, Donna. My girl loves to play with other dogs in the yard, but if they come inside, she attacks them or pins them up against the wall. She's a 10-pound terrier mix. Has she ever caused any injuries to other dogs requiring veterinary care? I know there's a little bit of a delay. So sometimes dogs can resource guard people or spaces. So inside is different than outside. So inside there's other valuable. Okay, so that's good. She hasn't. So not causing injury gives us really good information about her bite inhibition and her ability to control her mouth in those situations. So there may be things inside that she's a little protective of. So it could be space, it could be a bed, it could be other toys, it could be chews, it could be anything that she finds valuable that is inside the house that isn't necessarily outside the house. Some dogs do guard their space. They guard their home. So sometimes that is also an option, that some dogs are guarding, indoor space because it's their territory. But usually we look at that more as a resource guarding issue than a play issue. If she's playing perfectly fine outside, and she's not causing any injuries, those are good things. Those are good qualities in a dog. You could manage the indoor situations with gates, or keeping the dogs on leashes, doing slower introductions, making sure that all those resources are completely clean and picked up. So dog beds, chews, toys, everything completely picked up, and gradually trying to do new introductions inside to see if it can be isolated to a specific thing that maybe she's being a little guardy over. But that would be my advice in that situation. Those terriers are spicy. Any other questions? You guys have been great tonight. Lots of good questions. Oh, Lori, I saw your follow-up question. Can you put the dish outside? You could. I wouldn't put it too far out. Put it right outside the door initially, and then if he's comfortable there, you can start to walk it out. But I would really try a treat magnet and see if he'll follow that. Donna, I picked up everything but the water bowl. Okay. I mean, some dogs do guard water, not too many, but, it could be space. Sometimes it's also just confinement if the space is not a big space and the dog feels a little cornered or threatened. So if it's a tiny, I don't know how big your home is or what size space we're talking about. But if the space is too small, sometimes proximity is a trigger for some dogs. So that can be a trigger also. Oh, you want to be able to foster. So it doesn't mean that you can't foster. You just would really probably need to do some strict management. You'd have to have baby gates up and have some pretty, at least initially, pretty strict management for spaces inside and see how that goes. Sometimes it's also the specific dog. I don't know if you've tried multiple dogs or if it's, how many dogs you've tried, but sometimes, could just be that particular dog on that day. It's hard to say exactly what's going on. Chloe had a friend at the dog park who guarded her water bowl. Oh, yeah. Water's not usually a highly guarded resource, but for some dogs, it can be a resource. And especially if it's in a bowl that is a food bowl, sometimes that association can also carry if a dog is a food guarder, they see a bowl. Sometimes when we work through food guarding exercises, if a dog is a really voracious food guarder, sometimes we have to remove the food bowl entirely and start on something like a paper plate that isn't preloaded with such a strong guarding association before we can reintroduce an actual food bowl. But Donna, I wouldn't give up on your hope to be able to foster. It might just require some management in that, initially. And even with fosters, I usually recommend, and I might do a foster live Q&A in the next couple months. But, you're going to want to manage that situation anyway. I usually recommend decompression for the foster dog and not having an immediate integration with household dogs, just because we're still getting to know that foster dog. We don't want to overwhelm them. We don't want to throw too much at them. If they've just been transported, they've been bounced around, they need time to settle and decompress, and we don't want to immediately throw them in with other dogs. So being able to manage that space initially, even just for the benefit of the foster dog, would be really important. But if you only tried one dog, I wouldn't, a sample size of one is not enough to make any rash judgments on. So I wouldn't give up on your dog yet. Don't write her off. Any other questions? We got some good conversation here tonight. No, there's a little bit of a delay. All right. If not, anybody want to dive in last minute? All right. I think we're done then. Thanks for coming, everybody. This will be up on the Facebook page in a little bit, and I'll see you in the next couple of weeks. If you have any topics you would like me to cover, shoot me an email. You can contact me through the website. You can post on this comment thread once it goes live on Facebook or YouTube. Anyway, you can find me Instagram, any of those places. Send me Q&A topic ideas. I'd love to, talk on things that you guys are actually interested in. So send me ideas. So have a good rest of your week. Stay warm wherever you are. Chances are, if you're in the United States, you're cold. So have a good rest of the night. Bye.